So today we are going to continue on the data transformation we started yesterday. But before we go to Anypoint Studio, I have a couple of questions on Kahoot. So we will start with the Kahoot questions. And if there are some concepts you don't understand from the Kahoot, then we are going to build applications in Anypoint Studio and understand in real time what really is happening. So let's start with Kahoot questions. I have this one. Let me share my screen first. Share screen, my entire screen. And some of the questions are longer, so I have increased the time, like for some of them 2 minutes, for some of them 1 minute, so you can take your time and think. Okay, play. So there are around 50 people. Let's see if around 35 of you can join the Kahoot session. Okay, perfect. We can start now. To send a GET request to the endpoint, /box ID is equals to 4589. Where is the ID stored in the Mule event by the HTTP listener? Payload, variable, attributes, inbound. This is kind of preview actually. And you can see the number of seconds remaining on the left. So now, for example, 30 seconds remaining. Can manage it. So this is question mark. If we do question mark, then what comes after that is we say query parameter. Query parameters and the other parameters say under yes attributes. So just to review the slides, those of you who didn't get this question. Each request in each request in a scatter gather returns a Mule event. I think for this one, I have only 1 minute. Yeah, this one I should have made this. Each request in scatter gather returns a Mule event with a JSON payload. What is the final output? So we have scatter gather and we have different routes under that scatter gather. And if each route returns a JSON payload, what will be the final payload returned from the scatter gather? Is it the last one, the last JSON payload, the last Mule event, an array of all the payload JSON objects? Actually, I trimmed the question here because Cloud didn't allow me to make it long. So that's why it is saying 3. It was saying if it has 3 requests. So a scatter gather, if it has 3 requests, what is the final output of the scatter gather? This one we are going to see today by building an app. Yes, so I think this one could be a little bit tricky between an array of the three payload JSON objects and an object containing all three Mule event objects. So, but remember, when we have a scatter gather, our final output is one, a Mule event, and second, it contains the Mule event from each route. So the Mule event from each route, it gives us as a Mule event object, as an object containing all the Mule event objects. So this one we are going to build and see. So let me show if I have scatter gather. So we have this scatter gather, for example. In our case, it is writing data, but if each scatter gather in this case the flow reference, if we have an application where each subflow returns a payload, so that means this one will get a payload, this one also will get another payload, the bottom one will also get a payload, then our final output will be the scatter gather. We'll combine all of them and create an object from the Mule event coming from each flow reference. So that one we are going to build and see. So if you don't get it correct, that is fine, is what I'm trying to say. Okay. So next question. A main flow calls a subflow using a flow reference. Are variables from the main flow accessible to the child flow? So when we have main flow and subflows, if we use flow reference to call the subflows, what does the scope look like? We are going to understand that in detail, okay? But are variables from the main flow accessible to the subflow in device? Yes, no, it depends. Yes, so when we use flow reference to call a subflow, the subflow acts as if it were part of the main flow. So the Mule event as a whole from the main flow is accessible to the subflow, and what is processed in the subflow, the Mule event output from the subflow, is also accessible to the main flow once the flow reference calls that subflow. And yesterday we said if we don't want our original payload to be overwritten, we can use we can use the target and save it as a variable. We said that one we are going to build an application and see today. Okay, maybe we'll even start with this one. Next. Let's see if there is an image here. Okay, I have an image here. You have 2 minutes here. Take your time. So how do you access the city Cleveland from the JSON payload shown below? So you see it is an array because it starts with a square bracket and ends with a square bracket. And we have JSON objects inside it. We have 3 JSON objects. It is an array of 3 JSON objects. And the city Cleveland is on the second object. So how do you get the Cleveland value? To get that value, what do you do? So if it is an array, we access it using, we saw about indexing arrays. If it is an object, we use dot key, since we have key value pairs in an object. Remember, it starts from 0. So indexing in DataWeave, indexing starts from 0. So payload of 0 is the first object. Payload of 1 is the second object. Payload of 2 is the third object. So and if I do payload of 0, it gives me the first object. Then once I get the object, to get the value, for example, for Tokyo, the first city, I do payload square bracket 0 dot city, then it will give me Tokyo. And for Cleveland, also the same thing. Payload of 1, which is the second object in this case, dot cd with distance. So you can practice these things on the data with playground. There are examples there. Go over it again and again. But the answer in this case is show media. Let me do this show media. So we have this payload. Then when I do payload of 0, it is this second object. And once you have an object, to get the values of any key, we do dot key. So these are the strings on the left are called keys, and they are values on the right. And those on the right are values. Like CD is key, Cleveland is a value. So once I do payload of 1, it gives me the second object, dot city, it will give me the value of the city key, which is Cleveland. Okay, next. We have another one. This is the last question.
Why not C? Why not C?
This one we have talked about it. An event contains a payload that is an array of objectives. We have 2 minutes here also, you can think. We have an event that contains a payload that is an array of objectives. How is the event routed in a scatter gather? We have a scatter gather, for example, with 5 routers. This array, does it send the whole array to the scatter gather routers and process it sequentially? Or does it send the whole event and process it in parallel? Or does it divide the array into smaller chunks and process the smaller chunks in parallel, or should sequentially divide? Understanding those things is very important. Okay. Actually, I gave this one more time than zeros. I think all of you have answered. So anyways, the answer is the entire event is sent to each route and processed in parallel. So when you think of scatter gather, is this one, for example, this execution is in parallel. We have scatter gather, router here, then each flow reference will be executed in parallel. So the answer is the entire event is sent to each route and processed in parallel. Perfect. Yeah, those of you who missed it, go over the slides and also over the videos and understand what parallel execution means and how it is different from running your code in a sequential way. Okay, so let's start. Done. Let's see who are well. Samare, thank you. Salem and Dinian. Thank you so much, guys. Okay. So, now, today we are going to talk about, let's see what we are going to talk about today. So we will continue our data transformation from yesterday, and also, let me open the Google Drive for the class I have here. Week 5. So basically we are looking at transforming XML file to JSON, CSV, and Excel. And also we are going to see if we get time transforming Excel data to JSON, CSV, and XML. If we don't get time today, we'll do it next time. But we also are going to understand about this. Can you mute yourself, please? Can you mute yourself? Where is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I muted him.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dosu.
Excuse me, doctor.
Yes?
I don't understand how we can participate in the question. I was trying to pick answers, but I was not sure.
Is it your first time today?
No, I've been attending, but for the same time, I've been missing classes. So I don't know how I can facilitate the question.
Are you part of the study group? Are you part of the study groups? Have you communicated with them? Okay. Okay, no problem. So today we are going to continue our data transformation from XML to JSON, CSV, and Excel. And also we are going to see how to transform Excel to JSON, CSV, and XML. The other thing is we are going to even start with discussing about understanding because yesterday we talked about when we have a flow referencing a subflow, we say if you don't want the payload to be overwritten, we can save it as a target variable. So we are going to understand the scope between flow and subflow, and also we are going to understand the Mule event structure of scatter gather. So first, let me start with this one, with the target variable and flows and subflow. So this data transformation will come to it later. Let me close this project and okay, this one also let me delete it. Delete. Create new project. Flow, subflow, scope. Finish. So when you experiment with scopes, you can use either a listener or even you can just use a scheduler. So under the core module, we have scheduler here. Drag and drop it here. So the scheduler, I want it to trigger the flow every 10 seconds. Basically, I will run it only once, but to see the structure. But let's make it like this. So this one, we are adding it here so that it starts the flow for us. Okay, so the question we are trying to understand now is when we have a Mule event in the main flow, what part of it is accessible to the subflow, and also what part of the Mule event from a subflow is accessible to the main flow, and how do we save the payload from a subflow as a variable or as under the target value. So let me create here a payload and a variable. So drag and drop set payload and set variable. So this one, I will call it just payload. I'll show you, for example, the first case, let's see when the payload gets overwritten, the payload and the variable. So its display name is just payload, and here I can call it payload1 string. This one also is just a variable, and I will give it my var, for example. Okay, my var, and the value is my var, any value. Now we have this under our main flow. Now let's bring a subflow. We have subflow here under the core module. We have this subflow. Those of you who joined recently, maybe the things that we are looking at today could be confusing. So as much as possible, please go over the videos and the slides from previous classes and catch up as soon as possible. So bring a subflow here. So under the subflow also, let's add a set payload and set variable. And so the reason that I'm doing here, this is dummy, just, I mean, as you can see, it is not a real world application, but we want to see how the payload and the variable change across the processors. So this is a second under the subflow is the payload we have, and here what name did we give it? Payload 1. Let's give it here payload 2. because we want to see it when it changes from payload 1 to payload 2. This one, it was my var, let me call it my var1 here, my var1 here, and even my var1, and here I will call it my var2. So with a variable, with a payload, we don't give it a name, but for variable there is name here. If the names are different, then I will have 2 variables. However, if the variable names in here and in here are the same, when the main flow references the subflow, the result from the subflow will overwrite what was there in the main flow, so the variable will get overwritten. So let's give them the same name, and later we'll give them different names and understand. So this is my var. The same way this one also, we just call it my var. Now let's add a flow reference. So to call subflows and the private flows, one way of doing that is using a flow reference, and flow reference is here under the core module. Again, bring it here. Even before the flow reference, we can add, you can add a logger, or I guess this one is also fine. We can see it in debug mode and see as it moves. Okay, so we have this flow reference. This one, let me give it a shorter name. My subflow, I'm calling it. So the flow reference, it needs a flow, a subflow or a private flow to reference, and we are referencing this subflow now. So I go to this drop down and select my subflow. So what am I telling it? This flow reference, I am telling it to get results from this subflow. And this subflow, what is it doing? It is setting a payload here. Some payload 2 is a value for the payload, and also it is setting a variable here, and the variable name is my var, and its value is my var2. Okay, so now does anybody have any question here before we run it in debug? Do you understand what we are doing here? What's the goal of creating this simple flow references? Anyone, do you have any questions? You can raise your hands and ask. Okay, so if this is good, then we run this in debug mode. Always, if you want to understand the structure of the Mule event as it travels from one processor to the next, we have to first run it in debug mode. And understanding the Mule event structure as it moves from one processor to the processor is the core component, I think, to understand the data transformations. So here I right click here and run it in debug mode. But before I run in debug mode, by the way, I have to add breakpointers so that it can stop before executing the component that has a breakpoint. So add a breakpoint here, maybe here also. Let's add in all of them. Here also. I have added in all of them. So this scheduler, the first one, the scheduler, it is not doing anything except just triggering the flow every 10 seconds. So the execution will be triggered every 10 seconds. So the first times the flow is triggered, the Mule event, it doesn't have a payload. It will stop before executing this one. In this one, once it passes this component, then now it gets a payload. It has some payload. Next, once it passes this one, it has a variable as well. It has a payload and a variable. Next, when it goes here, when I click next, it will count here, and the payload, it will get another new payload here and another variable here, and the payload will overwrite the previous the original payload that we created here, and this variable also will overwrite the variable we created here. However, if we want the payload and the variable not to be overwritten, if we want both of them to use them in our downstream part of the flow, there is a way to do that, and that is what we are looking at. Okay, so now we run this in debug mode, Okay, until it deploys, does anybody have any question? I can take one question. So by the way, this one that I'm doing is related to what we saw yesterday. So in our yesterday's Google Slides, we had this question under the Kahoot question is, where was it? Down, I guess this one. Yes. So we are looking this one. You have a flow reference component. It sends a non-empty JSON object payload to another flow named child flow, which then returns an XML object, an XML body. A flow reference component saves the payload returned from the child flow to its target attribute named payload, referred to the exhibit here. It shows this plot here. Now, what is true about the Mule event's payload after the next event processor, after the flow reference component? So what this is saying is the same thing like in this one. You have, okay, this one has already started. So the question what it is saying is, you had the main flow here. It has, originally it has an a JSON payload. Then using flow reference, it calls another subflow, and that subflow returns an XML file, an XML object, but the payload is saved as a target, not as payload. So now the question is, after the flow reference, at the end, what is your payload? Is it the payload that comes from the subflow, or is it the payload from the main flow? Is the question. Actually, in here, let me add also, I think it is, I forgot to add a logger here at the end. So the logger also, I will add a breakpoint to it, and this one should be in debug mode. Let's see if it updates the changes and redeploys the artifacts. Okay. So okay, now I think it is ready. Let me exit this one also, start over. Okay, so pay attention now. Pay attention now. So our flow has been triggered. As you can see, the scheduler triggered the flow, and it has stopped at this the first set payload component. If you see this dotted rectangle, that means that has not yet been executed. It has stopped there. So the Mule event structure, that's the content of the data and its attributes. You can see it from here. Attributes, you see it is null. That means there is no attribute. Payload also it is null. Variable also it is of size 0. So there is no payload, there are no variables, and there are no any attributes. Now when I click the next processor in here on the top right, since the set payload will be executed, now we are setting a payload. We'll have a payload value. So if I click this, see now I have payload 1. See this one? This payload 1 is what we just set here. It can be anything. This can be data coming from a database or from somewhere, or reading data like we were doing yesterday also. So now we have payload, but we don't yet have a variable because this set variable has not yet been executed. Now if I click next, as you see now, we have a payload, which is payload 1. We have also a variable, and the variable value is my var1. Now when we go to the flow reference will call the subflow. And in the subflow, we are setting another payload and another variable. The variable name is the same, and the payload also, we are not saving it as a target. Now, at the end, what will happen to the original variable and payload is the question we are trying to understand. So click next. Now it comes to this set payload. See, my payload so far is payload 1, but now once this second set payload is executed, my payload will change. Click next. See, now my payload has changed. If you see here, I don't have payload 1. So when I say a payload could be overwritten, it means like this. Now my original payload is lost. So, and if you are, let's say you are enriching data, you want to get data from different sources, you have such kind of a flow calling another subflow. In the flow, you got data from somewhere. From the Subflow, you get data from another location, and you want to merge them together. If you don't save your original, if you are not aware of this concept of payload getting overwritten, then your application will not work. Okay, so let's click next, and let's see what happens to the variable. So the variable, when it comes to the variable name matters. The variable name, if the variable name is different, it will not be overwritten, but the variable name we have is the same. So click next. As you see, if it got back to the logger. Now if I see to my var, also the variable, I have one variable and its value is my var2. So you see the payload and the variable we have at the end are the payload and the variable from the Subflow. The original payload and variable from the main flow have been overwritten. So we know now when you have a flow that calls a Subflow using flow reference, then it accesses the Mule event, the main Mule event from the main flow is accessible to the Subflow, and the output from the Subflow, the whole Mule event, comes to the main flow, and the payload can override the original payload if the payload from the Subflow is not saved as a target. And also the variable is coming from the Subflow. If they have the same variable name as the variables we have in the main flow, then the variable values we will have will be the values from the Subflow. So let me finish this one, and then I will take questions. So how do we save that? How do we save our payload from overwritten and also our variable from overwritten? That is an easy thing. The variables, we give them different variable names. So this one we call it, for example, my var a, and this one my var b, and we say variables, data from variables, we access it vars dot. So if the variable name is different, then the data will be there. It will not get overwritten. However, about the target variable, this payload from the Subflow, rather than okay, so okay, give me a second. Where is, I thought I saw saving it as a target. Wait, give me a second. Display name is payload general. Do you see target here? In the Subflow set payload, let me maybe stop this and see if I can see it. Stop this project, and now see here, what do I have here? Okay, I see. I don't have
In the flow reference, I think
the
target exists in the flow reference.
Is it in the flow? Oh, it is okay. Oh, it is in the flow reference. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it is in the flow reference. Thank you very much. Yeah. So what comes from the Subflow in the flow reference, I save it as a target here. If I give a value for this target, the payload, because you see here in the flow reference, what is coming is as a payload is a payload from the Subflow, and rather than just coming as a payload, I can create a variable here. So under the target. So in here, this target, for example, if I put my target, if I put like this and save it and rerun it in debug mode, Okay, so maybe this
Okay.
can take a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds.
May,
Does anyone have any
may I,
questions so far?
yeah, may I ask while it is
Sure.
running?
Yeah, perfect. Go ahead.
So when we set a target on the flow reference, so does it mean that we are saving the value that the value of the payload that comes
Yes. Yes, the
directly
value.
to the flow reference itself?
Yes, the value of the payload coming to the flow reference, that means in this case from the subflow, is saved as a variable, and to access that payload, we access it using vars.targetName.
Okay, so are we saving the payload that comes from the subflow or from the flow?
From the subflow. From the subflow. Because this
from
flow,
the subflow. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
this flow reference, it is referencing this subflow, and let's see the properties here. So the target value, that means what comes from here is the payload, and it is being saved as, you give it some name here. If you don't give it a name here, then it will be just payload and it will overwrite the original payload. Let's see what's happening here.
Okay.
So initially, as we said, initially the values are, let me clear this one, clear your screen to make it tidy. You click this one, clear console, and I will move this to here. So click next processor, next processor, next processor, next processor, and here. So what do we have? See, payload now is payload 1. That means
Payload 1.
yeah, this payload has not been overwritten. However, if we go to variable list,
target payload 2.
Yeah, the my target, which is which contains payload 2, is this one. I mean the payload that comes from the subflow. In here, I'm calling it my target. So that payload, if I want to concatenate both payloads, for example, now what I will do is payload, which is payload 1, when concatenated with vars dot my target. So the payload from the second from the subflow, if I click this, you see on the right there is evaluate the data with expression x plus y equals question mark. So I can come here and you can check vars dot and what is it, my target. So it should give me payload 2 in this. Yeah, so you see it is saving it payload 2. So the main thing here is, okay, and as other things that I forgot is this variable, I didn't give it a different name, shall I say? Why I don't see my var b is not here for some reason. Okay, yeah, this one I should see the variable as well. Let's see, let's start over. So since the flow is being triggered every 10 seconds, it has started it already. Click next, next. So one variable and one payload now. This is payload 1 and variable also my var 1. Click next. The variable is the same thing, the payload is the same thing. It is in the subflow now, as you can see. Click next. Okay. Payload. The payload changes to, oh, okay. When it reruns again, how did it get this payload? How did it get it? Okay.
Yeah. Because you set on payload on the subflow is payload 2. We are on the set variable 2.
Yeah, but this flow reference, I have saved it, right? I saved it as a target. Let's see. Oh, I am here. Yeah, I am in the subflow. Yeah. I have not exited already yet. Yeah, so now the original payload is there, my payload 1, from the subflow, after it gets back to the main flow, the payload we have is the original payload, which is payload 1, and we have variables. I don't see this one. So okay, So what we are learning here is, if you have variables, I think experiment this one, take more time and experiment with it. If we have variables in the Subflow, and if we set a target for the payload, that means variables from the Subflow don't come to the main flow, is what we see here. Let's see the flow reference here, because what's happening here is, before, if we don't specify this value, then we had var2 also coming from the Subflow. But if we specify this value, then we don't see the variable in here, which is my var b. It is not coming. So experiment with that and check if that is the case. If we specify a target, if we save the payload as a target, which means as a variable, then it accepts the flow reference. Here we are telling it, I think, to accept only the payload as a variable, and variables from the Subflow are not coming. So experiment with that. I will test it myself also, and we will discuss about it next time. But you see, this one, the question we discussed is, if you save the payload from the Subflow as a target, then your original payload is not overwritten, and the payload from the Subflow, you can access it as a variable. Okay.
Can you remove the var2 space from?
Did I have space?
Yes.
I mean, this one is what matters. The variable name is what matters. This one, it should be fine, because I'm putting just a string. So you can put anything here, but the variable name is what we use to access the value of that variable.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So, doctor, does it mean that if we remove the my target on the flow reference, the output that we can see on the logger will be payload 2?
Yes, we will have payload 2 and variable. Yes, so let's remove this. If I remove this, the payload will be overwritten. That means the payload coming from the Subflow will override
With the outputs.
Yeah,
Okay,
and also I will have the variable also. We can add this in the logger. Let's add this in the logger. Change this to what we can do is
payload.
So we have payload, and we have both variables. So this is my var a, this is my var b. So in the logger, what we can do is payload is, to change this to an expression, you add hash square bracket, and you can add payload here, and variable a is vars dot I have my var a, accesses that, and the b is vars dot, let me do this and change it to b. I don't know why it is not accessing it. So I can do like this, and it will in the console, in the logger, in the console, it is going to print the payload value with this payload, and variables a and b, what they are. So
I think variable 1, can you variable a, can you spell it?
So this one is my var. This is, it is not. So we focus on we use the variable name to access them, right? So we focus on the variable names, not the value. So we have here my var a, and here I have my var b, and that is what I have done here. So
I think on the logger there is a spelling error on variable a.
Is that okay?
I don't think so.
There is variable.
Var is my var a.
Yeah,
my variable
a. I think you can remove L and
L before B.
Before B.
It's a string, no problem.
Oh, these things are
Yeah.
string. Okay. Oh, you mean
It's a
typo?
string.
Okay. This one is that's
Not a
fine.
typo,
What you
yeah.
have to pay attention is on the expressions. This one and this
Yeah.
one are Mule expressions, but these ones are just strings. So it will print it with the mistake itself. So this one you are saying it should be my variable a like this.
Yeah, like that, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. So now save this. Yeah, but this one, pay attention. This one is common. By the way, if you see says online questions or certification questions, and in a logger, if you want to concatenate string and expression, you can use plus sign, double plus sign, or you can use this approach. You put string, and in between, if you want to put an output from an expression, you use the hash sign square bracket, and within that square bracket you put either your payload or your variable or your attributes and so on.
Okay.
So okay, this one now, let's click next. Let me resume it, start from the beginning. Okay, initially no variables, no payload, no attributes. I have payload one. Now it goes to the subflow. In the subflow, I see payload 2 because it is in subflow still. And click next. Now I have two variables. So the variable C, this one, I was not aware of it myself. So you see variable my var A and my var B. Now my var B is there. If you don't save in the flow reference, if you don't save your payload as a target, then you get all the Mule event from the subflow. But in the flow reference, if you explicitly say you want the payload, and if you save it as a variable, then you don't get the variable from the subflow. Is what we have. Because this my var B was not coming before. Now click next and let's see what prints in the console. So in the console, if I come here, so you see payload is payload 2 and variable A is my var 1 and variable B is my var 2. My var 2 and payload 2 are coming from the subflow, and our payload has been overwritten. We don't have, we lost payload 1 from the main flow. Okay. So now does anybody have any question here? Okay, so we can close this one and close this, stop it, and get back to our yesterday's lesson. What's the other lesson we have in here? The other one, okay, before understanding Mule event structure, let's first finish the data transformation from XML data to different formats. So I will go here, move this here, and I stop this project. Okay, as I said, if you have different projects to close, you should not have all of them active at the same time. The ones that you are not interacting with, close them by just right-clicking. So this is our data transformation that we started yesterday. We say data transformation is important in automation because different systems and different devices need the data in different formats. So if your data, for example, in one data lake is in XML, but your data analysts want the data to be in CSV format and also aggregated from the original hourly data to daily data, then the data transformation, we can automate it using MuleSoft, we said. And the other thing also, another application we said is maybe you have lots of columns and only some of the columns are important. So you back up the data that you don't want, but the data that is near and dear to you that you usually use, then you filter that and move it to a more computationally optimized service. So you can use MuleSoft to automate such kind of processes, we said, and we started building an application. The application, for those of you who were not there yesterday, the application that we are building is this one at a high level. Where is it? Did I do it? Yeah, here. Okay, this one, right? Yeah, this one kind of T. Yeah, I think I have deleted one slide maybe, but it is something like this. I can explain it here. So we have different kinds of flows. We talked about main flows, subflows, and private flows, and we talked about their differences. So subflows are like functions in other programming languages rather than having a very long flow, like rather than explicitly writing the same code again and again. You can just wrap it in a function, some part of your code, and call that again and again. So that's what we are doing here. So we have a new or updated file trigger. This one, what it does is it closely looks to a folder of interest, and if there is new data in that folder, let me move this a little bit up. So we have 3 folders we created yesterday under data transformation. We have 3 folders: input folder, output folder, and the backup folder. And you can think this input folder is, for example, in AWS. In AWS, it is an S3 bucket, and there is raw data coming to it. And from that raw data, we want to read it, process the data, and the output, maybe we want to send it to another bucket or write it to a database. So for now, we are using this output folder. And also the original data, we don't want to delete it. Rather, we want to back it up. And rather than leaving it in the same S3 folder, we want to move it to a less costly AWS S3 service. There is what is called Glacier, for example, for backup. So think this backup folder corresponds to that. So our application, here we have specified, I think, every 10 seconds, it checks the folder and it reads the data. Usually this one happens, maybe you have data coming in every hour, or in some companies, they have application data coming every day. Like for the previous day, they may get the data in the morning. So you want to build a MuleSoft application that takes care of the automation for you. So every 10 seconds, it reads, it checks the bucket. And the other thing is, we said we specify the file pattern here, because I want to process. I want to process only XML data. With the original data, I may get metadata in some other formats, and I don't want to process that. So I'm specifying the file pattern here. We said this asterisk corresponds to the file name, and I am saying here any file, process any file as far as the extension is XML. That's what we are saying here. And the other important things we talked about are about deleting the original data and moving it to a backup location. So we are moving it to a backup location in this case, and also the data that has been backed up, we want to prepend to it the keyword backup, and also we want to add date and time to the file name, because we want to know when it was backed up. However, in the file name, we can't use the date time as is, because it has colon and also dot, and dot is a file name extension. Like when we do some file .csv, if it has 2 dots, it will not work. Or if you have fish dot, for example, if the file name, if it starts with fish, then you have the date time where there is dot after the seconds, then you add .json, that will not also work. So we are converting the date time to string, and to the format of the string, we specify it using format. And here we are saying we want only the year, month, day, hour, minute, and second. Pay attention to the uppercase M for months here. So this one, we are extracting up to seconds. And the other thing we said is, when this trigger on new or updated file, when it reads data from the location, from the input location, under the attributes, we can get the file name. It gets a file name. We get it under attributes.file name. However, after this scatter gather is processed, the attribute is lost. So to make sure we don't lose the file name, we created a variable here right away after the trigger, and we are saving a variable, and this variable we can call it later. And the reason is this variable under the on new or updated file, we have this section is post-processing action. As you can see, this happens after the processing is complete. That means after the scatter gather is complete, and by that time the attributes don't have the variable name. So we saved the file name as a variable here, and here we are calling it using vars.filename. And we said also double plus is file concatenation. So this is how we are backing up the data, the raw data that came into that folder. And in the scatter gather, we have 3 routers that are going to be executed in parallel. The first one, it transforms the data to CSV and writes it to CSV to the output location. The second one, it transforms the data to JSON and writes it to JSON. The third one, it transforms it to Excel and writes it to the output location in Excel format, we said. And some of the things that we discussed were important are the data transformation. When we have XML data, when we read XML data, the way we access the data as arrays is using payload dot. This is the root node. We have to see what the root node is. We said, like for example, we saw 2 examples. In one case, the root node is data, and the other one was root. So for those of you who were not there yesterday, we are talking about we have XML data here. You can get it from my GitHub repository. If you go over the slides, you can get more information. So we have this one XML file. So as you can see, now here the root node is data. So we do payload.data, it is case sensitive, and then .row. If we do .row, it is going to give us this one only, the first object. But if we do .*row, it is multi-selector. We saw that in the data web playground. It is going to give us all objects as an array. So that is what we are doing here, payload.data.*row for this one. For another XML file, we have the employee. Its structure is slightly different. You see the root node is root. So we do payload.root.*row, case sensitive. So that is how we are accessing the data. In this Subflow, we are explicitly saying we want the output in CSV with the header, because by default header equals to true. If you don't want the header, you add header equals to false. And then here in the write to CSV, also we are adding we are prepending file to it, and then file, and then I'm adding from datetime. I'm adding datetime up to seconds .csv. Actually, we can add the file name also, the original file name in here, but I didn't do that. But simply let's do that here. So what we can do is vars dot, what was the variable name here? Is it file name? Yeah, file name. Okay, so here I come here, and here vars dot file name. So double plus is concatenation. For those of you who come from Python, in Python string concatenation is single plus. You can't also concatenate string and the datetime, but here you can, and you have to use double plus for concatenation. So we can do like this. For the other file types, I just change the extension for JSON. Here, just paste this here and change this to JSON. For Excel, come here, paste this here, and change this to XLSX. So this is Excel. Okay, The other important thing to pay attention, CSV and JSON are easy. In the data transformation, you just specify what the output is, and you give the array, because this gives us an array output. The same thing for CSV also, we have an array output. Whereas for Excel, we said in Excel you can have many sheets, different sheets, so you have to specify the sheet name, and the sheet name we specify it using key value pairs as an object, and this one is the sheet name. I can call it whatever I want. I'm calling it sheet 1, and this one is the array itself, the array that comes from reading the XML data. So this is all. The other thing I think I didn't include initially in the Google Slides, later I added it, is the in here in the write operations we have to specify the directory. So under connector configuration, you click add, and let me click edit for now since I have one. You go, when you click add, if you don't have one, you come here, then select this connection, choose this one, and specify your output directory, your output location. So in my case, it is this one. I just selected that. It knows when I give file names, it knows where it should save it. Even if here I don't have the full path, I have not given it the full path. I just gave it a file name, and it knows the working directory from here. And once I create, the other thing is, another good practice is when you write data, you have specified the working directory here, or the output folder here, the connection using the connector configuration. If the output is the same for the others also, if the location is the same, you don't need to add another configuration. You can use the existing one. You simply go here, and in the drop down, you will see what you have already created, and then you just select that. But if you want one of them to output to one folder, the other one to another folder, the other one to another folder, then you have to specify each one of them explicitly. And this is in real world, for example, it is practical. Different parts of your data, you may want to send it to different locations, so you can your output folder could be different. But in our case, we are outputting all the data to the same location. So this is XML to CSV, JSON, and XLSX data transformation using scatter gather and using their own new or updated file trigger. Now I will deploy this, and we are going to continuously put data to the input folder, and if we will see if it picks it up and processes it, backs it up, and also saves output data in the output folder in the different formats. So run this, make sure I have saved it. Yeah, there aren't any changes that are not saved. So run it. It says if it says there are errors, some cases it is not necessarily there are errors. It is because it doesn't know. Like here, I'm telling it to write payload, and it doesn't know where the payload is coming. So I just can click pause it. So until this gets deployed, I think we can talk. John, what is your question? Can you repeat one more time? Can you unmute yourself and ask questions? Anyone? Anyone has any questions on this? If you understand this, that means you are doing a good job. I think so far we have covered maybe around 20% of the course. So those of you who are not reading the content, the slides, and practicing, it will keep adding. So make sure you study what we have covered so far. But those of you who are who are doing the assignments and building the applications even before the classes, that is really a good job. I appreciate that. Anyone has any question?
Yes. When you say we have to send this one same location, which location you are referring to?
Pardon me, can you get closer to your device?
Yeah, moment ago, we are sending to the same location, not different location. What location you are
Yeah,
referring to?
in this case, we created. Did you go over the Google slides? So in this case, our final destination is this subfolder output. This one. So let me remove anything here. So our output, it doesn't have any data as you see. But in the real world applications, we will do that when we start looking at the cloud services, integrating MuleSoft with the cloud. You may send some part of the data to a database, which needs tabular data, and some part of the data, the raw data, without processing it, to just some data lake, for example. So in that case, your output could be to different locations. That's what I was referring. So here, our input, it doesn't have any data. Our output, we don't have any data. I'm making sure we don't have anything, and this makes correctly. Okay. Our backup also, let me make it empty. This one also, let me remove it. Okay. So we have these folders. Our application is ready. It is checking every 10 seconds. The new or updated file, it checks every 10 seconds in the input folder. If there is new data, it triggers the flow. If there is no new data, it doesn't trigger it. So if the difference between scheduler and a new or updated file to read data is scheduler, it will trigger the flow every specified time. Whereas this one, it triggers it only when there is new data or updated data. So here we have downloaded, yesterday we downloaded data from the GitHub repo. If you haven't done so, go over the slides, and we have the different data sets here that we are going to use for this class. Now I want XML data, so let me copy this airports.xml and take it to the input folder. So what is going to happen when I paste it here? Who can answer?
After 10 seconds, it will be deleted.
Pardon me?
After 10 seconds, it will be deleted from the input folder.
Yes, and it will process it and transform it, and will have output.
Go to the backup and the output.
Yeah.
Perfect. So do this now. Let's see. Okay. So I think, yeah, the data is gone.
Let's
And
check the backup.
if you go to the backup, you see we have backup, the prepended keyword backup to it, and we have date and the time up to seconds, and we have the original file name. Actually, in this file name, I should add a dash. So such things you can easily modify them. You come here, where is it? The file here. So the seconds and the file name, it needs a space. So I can add a dash. You can concatenate a dash to it here. So what you can do is,
before
here, yeah, either way.
Before file name.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is here. Okay. So
Plus after the file name.
yeah, okay, this one. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, if I do this now, I will have, so up to seconds is here, then there will be a dash, then there will be the variable name, then there will be the extension. Okay, so yeah, so that's what we have done. Now we can add more files. Just let's paste it again, or we can paste another file. Another one, go here, employee, copy this, come to here, and paste this also. And
but on the message transform, we have to change it into
the file name extension, the file name change, like the dash I didn't save it, so that will not be implemented in this case. Okay, this one has
the root node.
About the root directory, the root.
Oh, the root node. Yeah, the root node. Oh, this data is different. Yeah.
The node name is different.
Yeah, the root node is different, right? So in that case, I have to go here.
The transform.
Yeah, this one should be root. This one lowercase row.
Yeah.
Okay, go here also, paste it here, and come here and paste this also here.
No.
Yeah, so have to save that and rerun it. Let's see what output we have. For if we have in the output, if you have in Excel, in JSON, and CSV. Yeah. So for the airports, I don't know how let's see the output for XML, what it looks like. Probably some kind of error. Yeah, this is empty because there is no our root node in the data transformation we put is uppercase data, but actually the root node is root, and it didn't get a node called data, so it returned null. So that's why we don't have data. Makes sense. So let's delete this. And here also, this one it should be fine. It just moved the original data without doing anything, so it doesn't go to the data transformation.
Only rename it.
Yeah, it is just renaming it, right? So until we understand that, let's rerun this, stop it, and it has been saved, rerun it. And until this runs, let's see the Excel. I want to show you the Excel data, what it looks like in the output. So we specified the sheet we said, and we called it sheet 1. You can have different sheets. Now, if I open this, I should see sheet 1 with the output. So I'm opening it. So you see the data like this, the original XML data. Now it is like this. We have headers here, and we have see this one. This one was when we put key value pairs in the data transformation for the XLSX Subflow. In here, we put it like this, sheet 1, and then the array. So the sheet 1 that name that key is this one, the sheet name. If we give, you can give it whatever name you want, and the array, the values of the array will be converted to Excel values, and they will be displayed like this. So this shows it working fine. And now let's try with the employee data. And in the meantime, while this one gets deployed, oh, it has been deployed already. So let me go to the input folder, and yeah, I don't have that data. I'll bring it now again. So employee, come here, data transformation input, paste it here. What do you see? It should go after 10 seconds, and it should be processed appropriately. Okay, perfect. So if I come here now, in the output, I have employee dot so this is so from the file name itself, it has a file name dot extension. That one is what is being included here, but the actual extension is what you see here under type. So if I open this one, it will be this whole string dot XLSX, not XML. XML is not an extension. It is saving it. It is including it as part of the file name. So if I open this properties, you see the file type is Excel. So now let me open this Excel. From that file name, by the way, let me give you another thing to try. From this file names, so in the variable, we save the file name as attributes.filename. Then from that variable, you can truncate, you can trim out the file extension. You can say, for example, remove the last 3. So CSV is including the dot, 4 characters, JSON, 4 characters. So we can say remove the last 4 characters. So as you see, this is the data. The employee XML data, it has been converted to Excel and it looks like this. Now let me show you in real time, like data coming continuously again and again. I have some Python code. Don't worry about the Python code. I just want to show you like data coming in regularly for your perspective. So I have this generate data Python code. It is just dummy data. Copy it here and take it to, where is it, to our I want to run it in the input
Data transformation input folder.
Yeah, go here and I have this. Okay, copy the path and go to that one here. Don't worry about all these things if you don't understand it. And I have Python here. So what we are going to do is we are going to assume data will come by itself regularly every some seconds. And Endpoint Studio should pick that up and process it. So we have this generate data code at a high level. Let me explain what it is doing. If you know Python already, you can get this in my GitHub repo, but if you don't, that's fine. Knowing Python is not at all a requirement for MuleSoft. Okay, why is it taking time? Okay, now it comes. So what I'm doing is, let me run this, and I don't need this one. What I'm doing is I'm generating some unreal data, random data. So I have person ID, last name, first name, address, and city. As you can see, except person ID, all the rest are string, and actually they don't correspond to anything. I am just sampling them from the letters from A to Z, uppercase and lowercase. But assume this is real world data and data is coming like this. It could be maybe if you have, it could be in my case, for example, at work, it could be interaction of customers with Amazon website, with Instacart, with Walmart, and so on. And it may come, the data may come every 5 seconds, or every, we have in my case we have data that comes every 7 minutes. That's I think the one that I know with the highest resolution. So the data that comes every 7 minutes, for example, you want to automate the data processing steps. So let's generate data like this every some minutes. And this one, as you can see, it is called data frame in Python R world. It is a table, as you can see, but this table we will change it, we'll convert it to XML and save it as XML. So the first thing is I have this data generated. Let me save one XML data and show you what the output looks like. So this one, I create a new cell here. Okay. So I am let me first show you the file name, what it will look like. So as I said here, this is concatenation in Python. It is different, single plus. So it varies. I mean, at a high level, just understand that the functions we have varies from programming language to other programming language. So you have to go to the documentation itself to understand what functions they have and what each function does. And here also you cannot concatenate string and datetime. That is why I'm changing the datetime here to string. Okay, so let me show you the file name. File name will be something like this, generated. Let me add dash here. Okay, so this will be the file name. Then it will have .xml extension. So let me save one data object, for example, and let's go to that input folder. So we have this one. Let me stop, by the way, since we will make some changes here. Let me stop this one for now. We have to understand the data structure first of the XML, the root node, and the different tags it has, and modify the data transformation accordingly. So now let me rerun this again, because that one has been backed up already. So if I run this and come here, we have this data. You see the data type is XML, and this is the file name. Now, if I open this using Notepad++, it shows me the root and also the different tags we have. So the root tag is data and the different objects that correspond to objects in JSON. Then they have row tags. So to access to get the data, the payload as an array, once we read this XML, what do we do? Payload dot data dot, if we just do dot row, it is going to grab this one. But if we do dot asterisk row, it is going to give us all these records, the 10 records we have as an array, and each one of these, each row tag will be an object with key value pairs. Actually, let me remove the index while saving. Index is like row number, so I don't want index. So this one, I can save it to false and close this one. So come here, we have another data. The one, which one is 16? This one 59. This one is most recent, so it should not have an index. So it looks like this, as you can see. One row, another one, another one, another one, and so on. So understanding the XML data structure is important. Now let's go to Anypoint Studio, and in our flows, let's make appropriate data transformations. So here, this data transformation we said should be, where is it? I forgot it. Let me open this. Payload.data in lowercase dot row. Okay. So we come here, payload.data, was it dot row? Yeah, this one should be fine. So copy this. For all of them, the array should be the same thing. The only thing is for Excel, we specify the sheet name and we give it as a key value pairs, where the value is an array and the key is the sheet name. So we have this one. So in here, this one reads data every 10 seconds, right? Okay, let's see here. It checks the folder every 10 seconds. Now we are going to generate data every 3 seconds so that we can generate more data before it backs it up. Okay, so now I will run this. I think I have saved it, right? There isn't anything that I have not saved, so run it. So now this Python code, yeah, it sleeps 3 seconds, then after 3 seconds it continues the same process. It generates data something like this, which is not real world data, but anyway, it is going to dump the data to that location. The first thing that I want to show you is we want to make sure data is coming to here. And the other thing is, in this folder, for example, I have this other files that you see. They are not XML, so Anypoint Studio will not touch them, will not process them. This one is a Python notebook extension. This one is also a file folder. So specifying when you process the data in here under the on new or updated file, or if you have read file operation also, specifying the file matcher, under the matcher specifying the file pattern. For that reason, this one, if you specify the file pattern, it picks only the files that match this pattern. Okay, so let's see if this has been deployed. In the meantime, I can run the Python code and see why it dumps data every 3 seconds. So see, it is adding data. This corresponds to some real world application where your data could be being dumped to a location in, for example, Google GCP or another data lake. See, then after 10 seconds, did you see the number of data files decreased? It was increasing. Yeah, now see here. So our on new or updated file is checking the folder every 10 seconds, whereas our Python code is generating data every 3 seconds. So you see, after getting a couple of data files, then Anypoint Studio is moving them, processing them, and backing them up, and also the processed data being saved to the output folder. So I think we can spend a couple of minutes discussing this if you have any questions, because understanding this is important. Do you understand what I am doing here?
Yes, but for how long will this one work? I mean, is this one sequential or?
So this one can work for as long as you schedule it. Like if it is in the cloud, as far as you have that service, it can work for years, for example, because this is just automatic, right? Think like, for example, in Amazon, we have a storage service called S3. So if you are an Amazon customer, let's assume they give you data, interaction of your customers to your website, for example. They give you the data and dump it to that S3, and from that S3 you want to process it and write what you want, the important part of that data. You want it to be saved to somewhere, database or something. So you can process all end to end, all this process. You can automate it, and it takes care of itself. You may need only check it once in a while to make sure there is no any to make sure that the business logic has not broken. But in this case, I mean, it is my laptop, so I will stop it. But I just wanted to show you this Python code is generating data, right? As you can see, there is asterisk here. It means busy. So what it does is it generates some data with 10 rows and writes it to that location. Then it sleeps for 3 seconds. Then after sleeping for 3 seconds, it continues the same thing. Whereas in AnyPoint Studio, it sleeps for 10 seconds, if you will, because it is checking every 10 seconds. Then grabs all the files that are there and reads them in and does the operation. Let me see what questions people have. Okay. Anyone in question? You understand this?
Okay, where did you specify, the path, the file is coming from Jupyter, so how did you specify that
Here.
one?
On new or updated file. On new or updated file, here, we specify the directory, we specify where it should back it up, what it should rename it to, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, where is that? I mean, the Jupyter path.
Oh, don't care. Okay. You want to test it yourself?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can go to, it is in my GitHub repo. So in that, so if you go to my blog, or if you don't know it, I will show you. Here under the free MuleSoft training, there is data for the course. It takes you to my GitHub repo. We have this free MuleSoft. Yeah, you can go to this one, MuleSoft. Under Sahabi, this one. Let me copy paste this one, guys. Here, where is it? So go to chat, to everyone, paste it here. So you can download that one. That is where we downloaded the data for the project or for the class also. We have free MuleSoft developer course. This one is the course, but the other tutorial, I have other tutorials, by the way. I have other 16, 17 tutorials on different concepts. So if you get time, you can watch them and practice with that. So the Python code is there. That Python code is, I think, the first one, processing continuously coming data using file connector in Mule for part 1, process, rename, and backup. And we are going to see once we cover databases also, we are going to see processing data and inserting it to databases, writing it to getting data from databases, and so on. So, but this one, you have all these tutorials here, or if the videos also, you can get them from my blog here, just MuleSoft tutorials. So if you scroll down here, all of them with short description are here. Okay. So anybody has any questions? Seems this one is specific.
I have a question.
Sure.
So do we have a limitation in, I mean, like the meat processor, does it have limitation? How many transactions that's processed per second. So do we
Oh,
have any
yes.
limitation?
Yes, that is a good question. Everything has a limitation. Everything has a limit. So one thing, it depends on your machine's processing power, and that is why we use cloud. When we use cloud, you have clusters at your disposal. That means you can use more computers. So based on the requirements, you can use the compute size. So yeah, and also on the MuleSoft side, also there is a way to optimize your data transformation and so on. Like this one, for example, we are optimizing our time by using scatter gather rather than running it sequentially. If we run it in parallel, it saves us time, we said, for big data. I mean, not for this dummy data. So that is one optimization. In processing also, there are techniques called like batch processing, parallel processing, and so on. All of them, we will cover them, but generally, everything has a limit. So we have the cloud, we use the compute power from there, and there is what is called scalability based on the requirements of your application. Your application increases the number of computers it has, it increases and uses more computers. But at the end of the day, it is not like infinite power. There is some limitation somewhere. In your laptop, though, the limitation is your laptop's capacity plus how you built your application. Okay, so let's cover the last one for today. Which one do you have? Let me stop this Python code for now. We don't need it. So see this one, this input folder, it is still working, right? So see it is dumping data. We should have lots of data files under the backup and output locations. I should have lots of data files. You see, I have all these data files. When you work with data, such kind of overwhelming data files, it is so common. So once you have this backup data, for example, you may want, there is some business question and the data you need could be from last year. Then you come to here, and from the file name, you can get which files to return. Yeah. Okay, and if you go to the output, also the same thing. We should have lots of data files, and we can open one of them and see if it parsed it separately. So let's open one JSON file, for example. So you see this one. So the table we generated in Python, now it is an array of objects. This one is one row, this one is another row, this one is another row, and so on. Okay, perfect. Now I can stop. My Python code. Stop. And now we are going to discuss the next one, which is about so we discussed this one. Actually, from this one, I learned that if you save your payload as a target, you don't get a variable from the Subflow, but you can save your payload from being overwritten using a target. And we finished this one. Using the Python, also using generate data continuously. I think this one, it needs time. We will do it next time. Let's just understand this one. Using what does the Mule event structure for a scatter gather look like? So I will go to Anypoint Studio, stop this, and yep, close this. Right click here and close it. And we understand the scope of flow and Subflow. If there is anyone who doesn't understand when you use the word scope, if you have not, like, if you don't have any programming experience before, scope means what is accessible at some point. Like in your programming, if you have data flowing through that program, the data keeps changing. Let's say, for example, what part of the data is accessible where. And in this case, also in MuleSoft, a scope, one question, like what part of the Mule event from the main flow is accessible to the Subflow, and what part of Mule event from the Subflow accessible to the main flow. Understanding these things is called. Now I'm creating another, our final project. We have around 20 minutes. I will create scatter gather project. So scatter gather project. So we want to understand scope, the payload, what does it look like? If we have scatter gather and each one of them have some payload, at the end, the output, what does it look like? And as we said, to experiment such things, you can easily use a scheduler trigger because it triggers the flow at regular frequency, so every 10 seconds. And let's bring, what do you want? We bring, let's bring a scatter gather. Where is it? It is here. Then we are going to create 3 payloads. Set payload. Again, set payload. Oh, this could correspond to getting data from different sources or from different databases. Get payload again. 3 of them we have, for example. So I will set payload to each one of them. Now the question is, at the end, what does our payload look like? Is it an array of the payloads? Is it an object of the Mule events? Is it the last one, or is it the first one? That is what we saw in the Kahoot question. So I will bring a logger here and add a breakpoint here. So this one, the first one, let's call it payload 1. And by the way, here, when one thing, pay attention to fx, and if you have fx, you can also enlarge it by clicking this one, show graphical view. So I can enlarge it by doing this, and I want my output to be in JSON format. The payload, I want it to be in JSON format. So I can say to specify such things, you start with %sign DW 2.0, that is to mean I'm using data weave, and then I want output. Output I want to be application JSON. So this is the header, or we declare this declarative section. Then we put 3 dashes. This is the body where we put our data, our payload. In this case, I want to create an object. Let's say first name. So first name is the key, and let's call it John. So this is the value. This is one of my payloads for payload 1. Go to payload 2. This one, let's call it payload 2. And here, also the same way, click here and copy paste what I copied, and this one I will change it middle name, Henry, then copy the last one. Someone, can you please mute yourselves? Okay, third one is this one. I will call it last name, and let's call it Wood, for example. So we have 3 payloads. Do you understand what we are trying to do here? We are trying to understand from a scatter gather, what does the output from a scatter gather look like? The Mule event structure. Because after the scatter gather, you have other components taking the Mule event and either enriching it or filtering it, and so on. So understanding the output from the scatter gather is very important. Like in the previous example we did, we were writing it to disk. That's fine. We didn't care about what comes after the scatter gather because we were just writing it to disk. But in many cases, after the scatter gather, we have other operations. So the other operations, we have to know what they will get from the scatter gather and what the structure looks like. So I have 3 payloads here: payload 1, payload 2, payload 3, first name, middle name, and last name, right? In key value pairs. Okay. So once this runs,
payload to twice.
okay, yeah, this is yeah, let me make it, sorry, this is for us a display name. It should not give an error, but yes, it should be named appropriately.
When you say payload 3?
Sorry?
When you say payload 3, since I see 3 payloads.
Yeah, we defined 3 payloads. One thing, you are far from your device. I don't hear your question. So we have 3 payloads we are defining here, and each one of them just dummy example. The first one is first name, key value pairs. The second one is middle name, I think. Let's see, middle name. And the third one, the last one, is last name. So after we run this, what do we get? What is the output at the end is what we are trying to understand. Let me add another logger here. Yeah, let's do like this and see what we have. Even one logger is also enough. So save this. So this one, for example, let me tell you one simple example, which is very common. Let's say you have multiple CSV files. Let's say we have 3 CSV files and we want to bring them together. We want to create one file by concatenating all of them. So first we read them, each one of them in parallel, then we concatenate them. That means we bring the payload from each one of them and create one bigger payload. So that is one example. So this is to help us understand its Mule event structure flow. Okay, run this in debug mode. Does anybody have any question until this gets deployed? So this one is, by the way, to help us understand. In the Kahoot we had one of the questions, right? Let me go to that. So this one. Everything okay. So this one, if I go to today's questionnaires, okay, I think it is this one. Each request in a scatter gather returns a Mule event with a JSON payload. Assume we have 3 routers. What is the final output? So the answer we said is an object containing all 3 Mule event objects. We want to understand that. Click yes. Okay. So actually I could have added breakpoints to this one also, but that's fine. So you see we have, you see this payload, it says of size 3. If you go to payload here, you see of size 3, and we see keys of 0, 1, 2, because we have 3 routers. This one, we have payload of 0 is the value for this one, payload of 1 is the value for this one, and payload of 2 is the value of this one, but it returns as an object, as you see, because we have key value pairs. So the output from a scatter gather is an object, but that object, it contains the Mule event from each one of them. The Mule event from this one, from the first payload, for example, we access it using payload.0. Let me show you here. Yeah, I see 0 equals to, and see at least on the right. Let's see this one. Let's understand this one. If you see this, so we said it is an object of the Mule event. So if you click 0, the value for it, you see it here. It contains the whole Mule event. If I click 1, it says 1 is this one. If I click 2, 2 is this one. It contains the whole Mule event. But let me see why it's not working. Payload. Yeah, do I need to specify here? Okay, let me see. Maybe if specifying the output data type is important. Payload dot I do like this, what do I get? Okay, if I do like this, you see it gives me okay, that's so weird. I had to specify the output data type. Now it works, so see, let me maximize this. Actually, it looks even more clear now. Rather than only the payload, what you get is the whole event. So you see, I did payload.0. When you use transform message, this should work fine. It is because I am using this temporary evaluator that was giving me error message. Whereas with transformer, it works fine. But for this one, if we add the output, what to expect? Because by default for this one, I think the Java output is Java, so it doesn't pass it. Maybe, but here, if I add this and do payload.0 as a string, see here, I get not only the payload, but the whole Mule event, everything in it. Had there been attributes, I would have also got the attributes and the other things and so on, but I have payload here. So to get the payload only, I do payload of 0 dot payload. So in debug mode, testing like this, it helps you to understand. I mean, you learn from your errors. That is, I'm learning with myself by doing like this with you. So if we run this, now we see I get first name is John. If I change this to 1, it will be middle name Henry. If I change this to 2, it will be last name Wood. So we are accessing the payload. The payload as the output is an object of the Mule event from each route. And a Mule event, as we know, it consists of message, it has payload and attribute and variables. And so the object has a Mule event from each of the routers. But if our interest is only the payload from each route, this is how we access it. Payload.0.payload will give us the payload from the first one. Payload.0.payload will give us the payload from the second one, and so on. Now, if we want to concatenate them, let's concatenate this and see. So I have this one, which is the first name, and I can just copy paste this 2 times, paste. So this is concatenation, first name. What do we get when we do like this? We can also create an array actually rather than concatenating it. We have this one. So each one of them is an object. When we concatenate objects, we get one bigger object. So pay attention to this one. Practice with it. Practice, create some projects and practice with it. Or try to read, for example, 2 CSV files. If you have 1 CSV file, divide it into 2, and using scatter gather in each route, let them read the data and return, give you the Mule event, and then concatenate them. To concatenate, if you are reading CSV data, for example, to concatenate it, so this one will be the data coming in from the first CSV, this one will be the data coming to the second CSV, then you have a concatenated payload at the end. Okay, perfect. So today I think we covered these parts and these parts. Next time we are going to cover this one. Next Friday and Saturday we will not have class because it is Easter time. But you have already, I think, enough things to practice and to learn. You have lots of jargons to practice to study and practice until our next class. I guess for today this is enough. If you have any questions, I can take questions. Are there
question, but so map object is iterating an object using mapper that acts like a key value plus index. Matthew?
Can you say that again? I mean, we have not reached at that kind of data transformation yet. We are simply looking at scatter gather. So we have seen how to access an array. If you have an array we access it using square bracket starting from 0, or if you want to start from the last, we start with negative, or you can say square bracket from 3 to 5, for example. And the same way, when you have a scatter gather is particularly different. It gives you an object. So in objects, to access their values, like, let me show this object. Let me share my screen again. So did we have a logger here? Okay, no problem. I can open one JSON file here. We have this object, for example, and let's copy. Just we need this object and paste it here. So for this one, if you need the person ID, if this is your payload, if you want to get the person ID for this object, what you do is payload dot person ID, because it is an object, so it gives you this value. In scatter gather also, the output is an object of the Mule events. So when you do, but the name is payload, but it is an object. So when you do payload dot 0 as a string rather than as number as string, then it gives you, rather than a payload, it gives you the whole Mule event from the first route. Then once you have that whole Mule event, you can do whatever you want with it. Particularly in this demo, we're interested in getting the payload from that. So that Mule event by itself is an object. So when to get the payload, particularly we do payload dot 0 as string dot payload. So we did payload 2 times. So let me explain that 2 times. Let me explain that here in detail, I guess. So in here, oh yeah, I can, let me see if I can bring this. Okay, so we have to specify our oh, by the way, let me finish this. We can use transformer rather than this evaluate data with expression window. What we can do is, let me show you. Bring transform message here, maybe here after the logger, and add another logger here, and in here what we said is, at the breakpoint here, this transformer, the output, we put JSON, and what we did was the payload, the final output that we get from the scatter gather is an object. So if you have an object, to access values of an object, you do the object name dot keys, and the object name in this case is payload. What are the keys? The keys are starting from 0. You see, when even I do dot, it shows me the different keys I have. So dot 0. Then this dot, when I do payload dot 0, that itself is a Mule event from the first route, and that Mule event contains different things. It is an object by itself. So I did dot again. It shows me what content it has, because the rest are null. We have only payload, so it shows me the the key that is not null. So when I do this, it gives me the payload from the first one. Plus, to concatenate with the rest, I did double plus and copy pasted these 2 times, and made this 1, made this 2. Save this, we can see for our service. Save this and make it in debug mode. And restart it. I mean, resume the debugging. Okay, in the beginning, so we have here under payload, it shows us it is an object with 3 keys. Now if I click next, it is in this transform message, and click next, this transform message has been executed. Now if I show you the payload looks like this. So this part, this key value pair came from the first route, this part came from the second route, this part came from the last route. I think this could be confusing in the beginning, a better way to understand it is to test it yourself. Just to build something, or this one also, you may encounter some errors, then help each other and you will learn from your errors also. Okay, let me take some questions. Asqual, what was your question? Okay, Asqual, what was your question? What if the data formats are different? Like, yeah, you can, by the way. If I understood what he mean, this scatter gather, the first one, let's modify this one. So remove this, how should I remove it? What I can do is remove these ones. So the first one maybe is getting data from a database, or let's say the first one is reading CSV, the second one is reading JSON file, the other one is reading XML file. Let's add the file module to here. So I can bring the read module here, and after that, again, bring it to, again, below it, another read module, another read module. Also, we are going to see, just for your perspective, but we'll see it in detail, but if you know database already, also from database, also bring select. This one will get data from database, from one database. This one, let's say it will get from another database. For each read, you can specify the data type. If I go to here, I can specify the location and the data type. You see I have my type here. So they can have different data types. This select, it will get data from another database. This one from another database. At the end, let me remove this one. This transform message is going to concatenate the results from the different sources, and the output, it could insert it to another database or send it to another application and so on. If I got your question correctly as well. Flatten, no, those things we'll see them later, but for now, just using the payload.0 dot payload and so on gives the results